The wind blew sharp and cold across the open Montana prairie, bending the tall grass and rattling the unshaped logs that lay scattered on the ground. A single woman stood among them, her back aching, her hands blistered, and her breath turning white in the fading autumn light. She was small compared to the wilderness around her, fragile even, but there was a fire in her eyes that refused to die. One log at a time, she lifted, dragged, and pushed the heavy timber toward the beginnings of a cabin she was determined to build with her own hands. Her hair, golden under the dying sun, clung to her damp face as she forced herself to keep working, as if her survival depended on it. And perhaps, in many ways it did. From a distance a man watched. A tall cowboy with shoulders stooped from years of hard ranching and eyes that carried a sorrow too deep to speak aloud. His hat shadowed his face, but not the longing that tightened his chest as he studied her determination. He knew what it meant to fight against loneliness, to claw out a home when your heart had been broken and the world offered no comfort. He had been a widower for 5 long years, raising cattle in silence and going to bed each night to an empty house that echoed with memories. Now, watching this stranger labor against the elements, something stirred in him. Something he thought he had buried with his wife. And right here, dear listener, before I continue, I invite you, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, in love found in unexpected places, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who could use a little hope. Comment your thoughts and subscribe to Stories Collection. Together, we can keep these stories alive for hearts that need them. The woman's name was Clara. She had come west with little more than a wagon, a few tools, and a dream carved out of desperation. Life had not been gentle with her. She was the daughter of a farmer who had lost everything to drought and debt. Her mother had passed from fever, her brothers had scattered to find work in towns, and Clara was left with only her courage and a few dollars saved in secret. She had sworn to herself that she would never again depend on someone else for her home or her worth. So she claimed a piece of land on the edge of the valley and began building a cabin where she could live free, safe, and whole. But freedom was heavy, and independence was a weight that pressed harder than she ever imagined. Each day, Clara worked herself to exhaustion. She struggled to roll logs into place, to hew them straight with her axe, to fit them tight against one another so wind wouldn't steal her warmth come winter. Her hands cracked, her muscles ached, and yet she forced herself forward, because every swing of the axe, every splinter driven into her palms, reminded her that she was no longer helpless. She had traded the comfort of an easier life for the dignity of her own making. But some nights, when the stars were cruelly beautiful and the coyotes howled from the hills, she lay in her wagon wrapped in a thin quilt and wondered if she would last through the season. The cowboy's name was Luke. His ranch stretched over miles of grassland, his cattle marked by a brand known across the valley. He had built his wealth with sweat and loss, but none of it filled the empty chair at his table or softened the silence in his home. His wife, Mary, had died young, taken by childbirth, and the child she tried to bring into the world never drew a breath. Luke buried them both beneath a willow tree near the creek and had lived with ghosts ever since. People respected him, but they did not know him anymore. He was a man with land and cattle, but no laughter, no warmth, and no family. Until Clara appeared, struggling with her logs on the far edge of his range. For weeks he watched from a distance, riding by on his horse, as though only checking his fences, though his eyes never strayed far from her small figure. Something about her grit tugged at the hollowness inside him. He saw her stumble and get back up. He saw her wipe blood from her palms and keep swinging her axe. And when he saw her pause at sunset, standing against the blaze of the horizon with her shoulders squared like a soldier refusing to retreat. Luke felt something awaken, a memory of what it meant to love, to hope, to want someone beside him again. But he held back. He knew the pride of a person building a life with bare hands. He knew if he rode up too soon, offering help, she might see it as pity, or worse, as a man trying to take what wasn't his. So he waited, watching the story of her courage unfold one log at a time. Winter threatened early that year. Frost settled heavy in the mornings, and Clara's breath rose in desperate clouds as she worked faster, trying to finish before the snow came. She barely ate, too focused on the cabin walls rising inch by inch. Her body grew thinner, her steps slower, and yet she refused to stop. One evening, as she strained to hoist a log alone, her knees buckled. The timber slipped and crashed to the ground, nearly taking her with it. She sat in the dirt, tears spilling at last, and for the first time she whispered to the empty air, "Maybe I can't do this." That was the moment Luke decided to step forward. He dismounted, walked to her slowly, and laid his gloves in the dirt beside her, as if to say he came with no demands, no pity, only strength if she wanted it. Clara looked at him through her tears, startled, defensive at first, then wary enough to let the silence stretch. She didn't ask for his help, but she didn't refuse it when he lifted the log and set it into place. That night marked the beginning of something neither of them expected. From then on, Luke returned often. Sometimes he worked beside her without speaking, letting the rhythm of axes and saws fill the space between them. Sometimes he brought food. Fresh bread from the town bakery, smoked meat, jars of preserves, always leaving them without fanfare, as though they had simply fallen from the sky. Clara accepted these offerings with quiet gratitude, her pride softening in the face of his steady respect. She learned pieces of his story bit by bit, not through words, but through the sadness in his eyes, when he paused too long at the sight of her, cooking over a fire, or humming softly while she worked. As the cabin neared completion, a warmth grew between them that had little to do with the logs stacked against the cold. Clara began to feel less alone in the wilderness, and Luke began to feel less haunted in his grief. He admired her strength, but even more, he admired her heart, the way she poured herself into building not just walls, but a home. She, in turn, found in him the quiet security of a man who knew how to protect, how to endure, and how to love even when love had broken him before. The first snow came on the very day Luke set the final log. The wind was merciless across the wide Montana prairie, whistling through the golden grasses that bent like waves under its force. It carried with it the sharp bite of winter that lingered just beyond the horizon, threatening to descend early and unforgiving. Out in that wild openness stood a lone woman, her small frame dwarfed by the endless sky and the raw land stretching for miles. She was wrestling with a log nearly twice her weight, dragging it inch by inch toward the skeleton of a cabin that she was determined to raise with her own hands. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, every blister on her palms split deeper with the effort. But she did not stop. She leaned her whole being into the work, because if she stopped, the dream would die, and with it, the fragile hope that had kept her moving this far west. Her name was Clara, and she was building more than a cabin. She was building her survival. She was building her independence. She was building a life that no storm, no man, no cruel twist of fate could take from her again. She had buried too much in her past. Her family's farm in Missouri lost to drought. Her mother buried in an unmarked grave when fever tore through their town. Her brothers scattered to far off railroads and mines. Clara had been left behind with nothing but a few tools, a wagon, and the kind of determination that can only be born from loss. When she claimed a small stretch of land at the far edge of the valley, people had laughed. A single woman trying to homestead alone. She wouldn't last a season. But Clara had burned those words into fuel. She would last, and she would prove them all wrong, one log at a time. And yet, the wilderness has a way of testing pride. The logs she cut and rolled into place seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Her body thinned from long hours of work and short meals, her fingers numb in the mornings, when frost clung to the earth. The coyotes sang in the distance at night, reminding her how small and fragile she truly was beneath the stars. Fear crept into her bones even as she refused to name it. Still, she rose every dawn, picked up her axe, and pressed on. From the shadowed ridge above her land, a man watched. He had no intention of spying at first. He had simply been checking his fences, riding the perimeter of his sprawling cattle ranch, as he always did. But when he spotted her, a slip of a woman fighting a log twice her size, something inside him stopped him from riding on. He lingered, curious, cautious, and strangely moved by her struggle. He told himself it wasn't his concern. Yet he found his horse circling that ridge again the next day, and the next, always finding himself drawn to the sight of her working alone. The man was Luke McCullister, a cowboy who had lived with silence for too long. His ranch was prosperous, his herd strong, but his home had been empty for 5 years. His wife, Mary, had died giving birth to their first child, and the child had followed her into the grave within hours. Luke had buried them, both beneath a willow tree near the creek, and had never again felt the warmth of laughter in his house. He was respected in town, admired even, but he was also alone. He carried grief like a saddle that never came off, and though he rose each day to ride the range, something in him had long ago stopped living. Watching Clara stirred a feeling he had thought buried with Mary. It wasn't just her determination. It was the raw courage in the way she refused to give up, the fire in her posture, even when her body trembled with exhaustion. Luke recognized that fight. He knew what it meant to stare at the impossible and push forward anyway. And so, day by day, he found himself drawn to her, his heart waking in ways he did not expect. Dear listener, before I continue, I want to pause here for a moment. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in love found in the most unexpected corners of life, please take a second to support Stories Collection. Like this video. Share it with someone who might need a spark of hope today, and subscribe to the channel. Your small action keeps these stories alive for hearts that are searching for light in a dark world. Clara's struggle only grew heavier as the days shortened. Winter was coming, and the walls of her cabin stood only half high. She worked herself to the point of collapse, cutting logs until her axe handle wore grooves from her blistered hands, stacking them as best she could with little more than sheer willpower. Some nights, she fell into her wagon without even eating, her body shaking from exhaustion, her dreams haunted by doubts she never spoke aloud. She remembered her mother's voice, soft and weary, whispering, "Life doesn't wait for the weak, Clara. You have to fight." And so she fought. But no fight lasts forever without breaking. One evening, as the sun blood red across the prairie sky, Clara tried to lift a log into place. Her strength failed, her knees gave out, and the log crashed into the dirt with a force that rattled her bones. She sat down beside it, gasping, tears finally spilling down her dust-streaked cheeks. The prairie was so wide, so empty, and in that moment, she felt as small as a child again, helpless, foolish, and utterly alone. Her voice cracked as she whispered to the silence, "Maybe I can't do this." From the ridge, Luke had seen enough. Something inside him broke open at the sight of her tears, and before he could think, he was dismounting his horse, boots crunching in the brittle grass as he walked toward her. Clara stiffened when she noticed him, her pride flaring even through her exhaustion. She swiped at her face with rough hands, trying to erase the weakness he had witnessed. But Luke said nothing. He only set his gloves down, bent his strong frame, and lifted the log she had failed to move. He carried it with ease and set it into place against the cabin wall, his movements steady and respectful, as if to say he wasn't here to take over, only to stand beside her if she let him. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him to leave, to protect the independence she had fought so hard to claim. But the truth was, her body was broken and her spirit trembling, and when he stepped back with a nod, she didn't push him away. She simply sat there, breathing hard, watching the man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer. She hadn't dared to speak. That night was the first time Luke stayed. He didn't camp near her wagon, didn't press her with words or questions. He built a small fire a short distance away, close enough to keep watch, far enough to respect her space. And Clara, lying awake in her quilt, felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe.